is still unacceptable. I don't like the fact that every time I drive home, I have to go through a border check on I-91. And I seriously doubt that we're picking up lots of al-Qaeda suspects down there. And I wonder whether the $9 million we're spending to make a permanent border check there is really a wise investment. I work with this concept of opportunity costs in my economic history class. You choose to do this, what are you choosing not to do? We spent $153 billion on the war in Iraq already. Give you one idea of what that translates into. Had we wanted to, rather than devote this to debt reduction, that would have financed over 7.5 million full 4-year scholarships to public universities for students like you. That may have produced a much better result for the United States than this aggressive war. War has all kinds of costs, and often the victor is burdened with them. Britain won World War I, but its economy was wrecked by its victory. And it didn't really recover until after another world war, until really almost the 1960s, did it start to catch back up to where it had been. We're running a grave financial risk in this country. The cost of militarism have brought down other great nations. If we add the cost of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan into the president's budget request, we see that he's asking for $500 billion for the military next year. Far more than all the nations on earth are spending on their militaries. Sure, we can act as a force in the world, and sure, we can create situations of deterrence. But when no country in the world has an aircraft battle carrier group, why do we need 10?
The next section of the debate, Mr. Hanson and Mr. Edsforth will be allowed to ask each other questions directly. Our first question will come for Mr. Hanson for Professor Edsforth.
This is a slight preliminary. I think we have 12 battle groups. I'm glad we have them because they're keeping the peace in the Mediterranean right now as we speak. They're keeping the peace off the coast of Korea. They helped in the tsunami, and you need 6 of them for every 6 that are out in the ocean. They do the world a great, I think, deal of good. Let me ask a question, though. Inasmuch as Bill Clinton did not ask the Senate for congressional approval to bomb Mr. Milosevic, and inasmuch as he did not go to the UN because he would have faced an inevitable veto from Russia, did you, Professor Edsworth, support the preemptive bombing of Serbia?
Actually,
what?
Professor Edsforth will now have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Al. Actually, I'm on videotape on that. At the time, I did not. We had a panel here with Ruth Wedgwood, international lawyer from Yale, and Peter Deck from the UN. And I was moderating and also participating in that panel, and I did not support that at that time. And I'll tell you why. I did not believe that what we would achieve would be a truly free society. I believed what we would achieve would be reverse ethnic cleansing, that the Kosovars would cleanse Kosovo of Serbs. And that is in fact what happened, or is what has been happening. Do I agree that the result of toppling Milosevic, creating within Yugoslavia a situation where he had to go hard, was a good thing? Definitely. I would agree with that. Do I regret that the UN did not act forcefully in that situation or earlier in the war in Bosnia? Definitely. Do I think that means they will forever fail to act in those ways, that there is no learning curve among leaders of the UN and the leaders of powerful nations in the world. No, I do not believe that's the case. I believe we're learning. These are hard lessons. But the situation we face, and this was brought up in the previous set of remarks, is not comparable to 1941, when the German Empire and the Japanese Empire and the Italian Empire were doing what empires had been doing for a very long time in Europe and in those areas where they attempted to exercise colonial power, competing with each other by launching aggressive wars against other empires, the British, the French, and even the American Empire in the Pacific, when we had one back then. The situation today is one where world opinion clearly endorses democracy and clearly looks upon aggressive war as something that is the legacy of the imperialist era, something that we should put behind us. And I can only reiterate my basic point, that our acting on behalf of a crusading nationalism, using aggressive war to achieve ends that most of us in this room agree would be good, is still aggressive war and still looks imperial to people all around the world. I cede the rest of my time to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Edsforth. Ms. Edsforth, you now have an opportunity to pose a question for Mr. Hanson.
Professor Hanson, do you believe that human nature has been fixed since ancient times?
If you could answer that, Mr. Kerry. Mr. Hanson will have 5 minutes to ponder the imponderable.
Oh, I should have stood up. No, I think there are evolutionary biologists probably in the audience who can focus on that.
I'm afraid that one of my problems is I was a classicist, and at 18 I discovered Thucydides, who said that his history would be valuable because the nature of man would probably not change. As long as man remains the same as we can learn of history. That's why history is valuable. It's valuable in a way that 19th century science is not, because with the discovery of the cell and the atom, we have a new science, but human nature doesn't change, and therefore we still can read Gibbon in the way we can't read a 19th century medical dictionary. Human nature is set, and that's very important to understand because it's governed by parts of us that are not quite rational. They're primordial, they're reptilian. Man is governed by pride and fear and envy, and we need to have collective, I agree with collective organizations, but the UN, I'm afraid at this point, we're not at the end of history yet. The UN is not that organization. We talk about a learning curve. Well, 7 years after Mr. Milosevic butchered 250,000 people, we're still waiting for another 100,000 to be accounted for in Darfur. Black Africans butchered by Islamic Arabs in Darfur, where the Arab League won't even talk about it. The UN won't do anything about it. And this is in the wake of 1 million killed, or perhaps it was 2 in Rwanda. And why is that? Because you simply can't have a collective organization that has any morality with the likes of Syria and Algeria and Cuba and Iran on the committees of human rights, because nobody asks anybody to be democratic. How can you have a democratic organization that has any moral authority? And why we wait for the UN, there's going to be a lot of millions who pile up and are died. At least the United States military is subject to a president who has to go get funding from a Congress whose people are elected, and subject to censure and audit by a supreme, legitimate, and independent judiciary. That doesn't happen with the United Nations.